very shortly. The earlier we start, the earlier we can complete our business. No, it's you have to eat 2 o'clock. Yep. Okay, good. Okay, I call to order the Board of Directors Special Meeting Workshop for the Florida Reuse Authority. It's Friday, March 22nd, 2 o'clock. If we could have roll call, please.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Burnett. City of Delray Oaks, Chair Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Morton. Here. City of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge. Monterey County Supervisor Potter. Monterey County Supervisor Salinas.
Here.
Monterey County Supervisor Parker. Here. City of Pacific Grove, Mayor Camp. City of Salinas, Mayor Gunter. City of San City, Mayor Pendergrass. Here. City of Seaside, Mayor Rubio.
Here.
City of Seaside, Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby. 20th Congressional District, Congressman Farr. 17th State Senate District, Nicole Charles. 29th State Assembly District, Erica Parker. University of California, Graham Bice. California State University, Eduardo Ochoa. Monterey Peninsula College, Walter Tribley. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, Marilyn Shepard. Monterey Salinas Transit, Hunter Harvath. Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Todd Muck. Here. United States Army, Colonel Clark. Fort Ord BRAC Office, Bill Collins. Here. Marina Coast Water District, Director Moore.
Here.
Chair Edelin, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I would ask Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell if he would please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, we have next acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence. Michael?
Just a few. Mayor Gunter called a bit ago and indicated he would not be here today. There's a pressing matter that surfaced in the city of Salinas that will keep him away this afternoon. And Councilmember Selfridge indicated that because of her work commitments, she would be a little bit late today. In addition, just a note for all, yesterday afternoon there was an extraordinary celebration and welcoming back for Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. Even though he's no longer Secretary of Defense, there was an eloquent speech made by Supervisor Parker talking about the important role that the Secretary played in the creation of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority and the work that's being done and the very important highlights here at the former Fort Ord. Very positive comments about that. As well, Leon commented about the importance for all of us to be diligent and with respect to our protection of communities, and maybe Supervisor Parker would like to add a note.
Jane, please.
Thank you. Yes, I would just say that I really appreciated CSUMB doing the heavy lifting of organizing an event like that. It's always nice to be there and we say, yes, this is important to do and we want to welcome our marvelous guy home, but really putting together an event like that takes a lot of work. So really appreciate all the work they put in, and yeah, it was really, I think, a nice welcome, and I see that there were several of the FORA board members who were there. We had pretty good representation.
I think there were 9.
All right, but who was counting?
Jane, thank you. Very well said. Any other members of the board like to make any mention about that reception? Seeing none?
Actually,
I'm sorry.
I would just, I'd also like to thank all of the restaurants and the vintners that showed up. I believe there were 19 restaurants that participated voluntarily, and I believe in excess of 10 wineries were pouring. So that whole social mix just showed that the community can really come forward when needed and really appreciates all that Leon had done. But I do think there was an extreme commitment on the part of some very, very well-known and well-renowned hospitality representatives there that said, we'd like to participate in this too. So I'd like to acknowledge their participation.
Thank you. Okay, we have a workshop here, but before that, we have a couple items of old business and one item of new business we need to get through first. The first item of old business, and consider 4 expense policies. Michael?
Yes, the board last week asked that on the expense policies that we bring back one section of the expense policies having to do with the authorized travel and to the extent that it would be 50 miles away from the home. We did look into the county's policies and other additional policies with the language that they use. There was a question, in fact, a directive to try to be closer to the IRS policies. It turns out the IRS policies are less restrictive than our 50 miles. It's actually 40 miles. So we decided to stay with the 50 miles and provide additional clarifying language so that it's clear that only when there's a certain or special case that would be, this would be deployed. Now, Ivana Bednarik is here if there are any additional questions on this one item, but it was the single item that the board members expressed a concern about.
Ivana, do you have anything to add?
I never know if this one is on or not. Is it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
The 50-mile range that was discussed during the last meeting maybe did not say in the previous version of the policy what it meant to say, and it was to define a local travel area for the purpose of FORA's travel policy. And it says that travel in the local travel area 50-mile range is not eligible for lodging or meal reimbursement, and that is now clearly included in the qualifications. And also, I wanted to point out that the policy, this policy, as well as the other expense policy, the expense reimbursement policy, have been revised to include consistent language regarding the processing procedure, and I hope that that addresses the questions discussed.
Any question by board members? Yes, Gail.
Yes, thank you. I was probably the one that was the most vocal about this, and the accommodations that you changed with regard to triggering when an overnight expenditure would be incurred are fantastic and did answer that question. Is that you put 6 a.m. in the morning, you had to leave before then. Much more reasonable standard to which all of us should be held. The second comment that for the consistency, the point that I had made at the last meeting was that I was looking for consistency not in discretionary time limits, but in mandatory time limits to put in for your reimbursement. In the prior draft, it stated for the employees, they mandatorily must submit their reimbursement claim within 14 days, but it was discretionary for the executive board or the FORA board members. And my point was to make them both mandatory within a time limit. And if the 14 days seems too restrictive, perhaps make it 21 days or a different amount. But the point of making it mandatory is, as a FORA board, we're budgeting items for travel expenses, et cetera, and we're always trying to make sure before we agree to and approve the next expenditure that we know how much of a budget we have spent or depleted. So if you have delayed outstanding reimbursement claims, you are not functioning with what's truly in your budget. And so trying to keep staff, FORA board, FORA executives into submitting these claims so we're always timely and knowing in any window what's left in a budget is so important to us. So I would request that they both be mandatory.
So change
Thank
from
you.
shall, must be submitted within 14 days.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you from my experience, it never was longer than that. I always get the reimbursement requests immediately after the trip because we don't have big staff, so we know who went. So we ask, you know, so we make that requirement.
Right, that they shall be submitted within 14 days.
Thank you, Gail. Yes, Ian.
I think that's language that the board would put in. So I'm not sure that we all agree to that. because I'm not understanding what's going on. What is the shall and will? I can understand about it for employees, but, you know, if we're talking about making it for the board, then that's the board's decision. So I'm just saying that sounds like a voting issue to me, that's all.
It will be. If we have to change the recommendation, we will bring it before the board. Other comments? Yes. Ralph?
Yeah, I think 14 days is too restrictive. It should be one billing cycle, whatever that is, 30 days. I mean, give some people some leeway. I mean, got to run around getting receipts together and doing expense reports. I hate that stuff.
Other questions? Yes. Bill?
I would like to try out a hypothetical. I'd like to say first thanks for being responsive to the changes that were indicated by members of the board. A hypothetical question on the travel policy. There's a first day, last day criteria for when we can pay overnight. And if, say, the executive director and the chair go up to Sacramento for an 8 o'clock meeting on a day that ends at 5, they can get reimbursed under this policy for 2 nights, the night before and the night after, as I understand it. Is that correct?
The policy says if the traveler arrives home after 9 p.m., it would mean, you said Sacramento?
Right, which is at least a 4-hour drive, and you got to stop for gas at some point.
Yes,
so
it would.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask a variant. If the meeting starts at noon on one day, and the same number of meetings occur so that they finish perhaps at noon the next day, as I read it, you can't reimburse for the night before or the night after. What's the basis for reimbursing for the night that you stay up there in between? And I'm not finding that in the policy, and I just want to understand how that becomes okay under the policy.
Mr. Chair, I might actually be able to answer that question.
Go ahead.
If you considered the mileage reimbursement for going back and forth to Sacramento, it's 200 miles each way, and you went ahead and did that at 54 cents a mile, you'd find that staying over was actually going to be cheaper.
Is there wording in the policy that tells us that you can make that comparison? I'm not by any means, by the way, suggesting you commute up and commute back on 2 different days. Doesn't make any damn sense.
Okay, I want to make sure that...
I just want to know that the policy language...
It actually doesn't, I don't think. If you
makes it okay.
If you go to the travel piece,
there is a approval procedure. And during the approval process, either the executive committee who is approving travel for executive officer and board members, or executive officer,
I understand.
Those things are considered, but that leaving.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is, after public comment, share an opinion on this.
Any other questions by board members? No more hypotheticals. Yeah. Okay, out to the public. Do I have any questions by members of the public with regard to the reimbursement policies? Okay, back to the board. Bill, you're on.
I think it's important that the words on the page actually reflect what we intend to do. And the hypothetical, and in my experience in an international company with a lot of travel, scheduling meetings so that you only have 1 night rather than 2 nights away from home is a common practice. I haven't figured out the words myself that say that's okay, but I think it has to get into this policy because it really is the most convenient way to do long drives like that, particularly a Sacramento trip. And we ought to allow people to do that without having to have obscure approval procedures that don't yet have a basis in the policy that's written.
Member Camp, I wanted noted a couple of things. First of all, that is our practice and it's been our policy. But if you look on page 1 under general policy, the very first thing we say is that persons traveling on official business will maintain a standard of economy that generates the highest function and effectiveness at the lowest cost to FORA. And we took a note from the Ad Hoc Forensic Committee on making sure that we put that in our documents. And then I want to point out also that there is a process that Ivana pointed out when there are special circumstances like the one you're mentioning, that's on page 2 of 3 on the very top of the page about getting the executive committee to support any special circumstances, and then in this regard, and if there's some additional language, we would be happy to include it. But I think we've accomplished it a couple of times, and then the last thing is under processing travel reimbursement. I think Member Oglesby indicated a question about where the change would be made. If you look on page 3 of 3, it says whenever possible claims should be submitted. That's the inconsistency. We either want shall or must to replace should, and if we are to comply with the suggestion by Mayor Rubio, we would change the 14 days to 30 days.
Dave? Did you have?
I'm trying to get on with the rest of the meeting here. So I'll move approval as modified.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor recommending approval as modified, extending the time from 14 days to 30 days, and it shall rather than should. That the motion was made by Supervisor Potter. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second made by Mayor Rubio. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Gail?
Yes, the only thing that I'm asking also is the words "whenever possible" be deleted from that sentence. That "whenever possible" was not in the version brought to us last week. That the sentence would read, "claims should be submitted within 30 days of travel," not
And
whenever
I'll
possible.
accept that as a friendly
So
amendment.
that's my request.
Okay, accept
And I
in a
think it
second.
appears in here twice, that both places would be the identical sentence. Thank you.
We can save some ink on that, no problems. Does a seconder accept the friendly amendment? Okay, any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much. I would note that this is probably the most restrictive reimbursement policy we have in Monterey County. And the issues brought up were very interesting issues, but we've really not had those problems of in the past with regard to abuse or whatever else, but it's always good to try to preclude problems from happening in the future. So again, the comments are welcome. Okay, next item on the agenda, short item hopefully. Okay. Hold on. 5. Okay, consider authorizing the executive officer to execute EPS contract amendment number 6. Michael, why don't you explain that?
Yes, Chair Edelin and members of the board, this request would allow us an additional $27,500 to complete work that the board has already authorized. These have to do with the Phase 2 study in dealing with the formula calculation, and also and especially to complete work that's essential for the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan endowment certification process. We had innumerable meetings on the question about how the endowment will be created, how it will be funded, and how that is certified. It will include some state of California fish and wildlife due diligence on how that's structured. It will require us to show how these particular efforts to create the endowment will pay for the Habitat Conservation Plan expenses over time, in perpetuity essentially. Jonathan Garcia has a few comments to add.
Yes, members of the board, just to give further background on this item, the board did receive a presentation at the previous board meeting regarding EPS's work in this regard, and the administrative committee as well has had presentations on March 6th and most recently this week as well on Wednesday. So the recommendation here would authorize the executive officer to, well, the first action is to approve a fiscal year 12-13 budget increase for the financial consultant line item from $60,000 to $87,500. And so then the next recommended action is to authorize the executive officer to execute a contract for up to $27,500 for EPS. and this work is needed to complete the financial analysis needed for bringing back to the board in the April meeting the recommended fee for forest development fee for the CFD and development fee schedule.
Thank you. Any questions by board members? Yes, Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question in the board report. It mentions that that this the fee formula calculation was reviewed by the FORA board on March 15th. I know it was only a week ago, but it was a long meeting, and I don't remember going over that at that meeting. I think it fell off the agenda because of the press of time. So it doesn't seem quite accurate to say we actually reviewed it. We could say it was on the agenda, but probably good to be accurate. Thank you.
Other questions by board members? Seeing none, out to the public. Any questions by members of the public?
Sid Williams from Marina. You might wonder why I'm up here, since this isn't really a veterans thing. But I urge you to positively consider approving the funds and getting the contract signed. Many projects are in abeyance pending the determination of the CIP program being finalized. Among those is the Veterans Clinic out in Marina, and I would certainly encourage your support of that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public wish to make a comment? Back to the board. Any other comments by board members or a motion, please? We have a motion to approve. Who was the motion maker? Dave. Okay, Dave, Potter, and Bill Camp. Okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve fiscal year 12-13 budget increase to financial consultant for $60,000 from $60,000 to $87,500, and to authorize the executive officer to execute contract amendment number 6 with Economic Planning Systems to complete phase 2 study of formula calculation, initiate ACP endowment certification process. Motion by Supervisor Potter and second by Mayor Kempf. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And for new business, we have consider authorizing a letter of support for Assembly Bill 730 by Assemblymember Alejo regarding the Monterey Salinas Transit Bond funding. Michael?
Yes, staff at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, as many of the agencies in the region, received a request from our colleagues at Monterey Salinas Transit for support for this bill that would allow them to sell low-interest bonds that would help assist them in issuing financing for creating transit facilities, as well as for purchasing buses and replacing some that are out of date and no longer provide adequate service. This is one of, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 bills that are actually moving along in the Assembly. There will probably be a request for similar kinds of support for another bill that I know that Assemblymember Stone is offering, but that'll come later. This one, I think, MST has asked for several to support. I know several have already done that. We would ask authorization to proceed. I apologize. I do believe that the draft letter was intended to be included in the board packet, but it didn't appear. If anyone would like to see one, we have copies we can make and provide, but it's a straightforward letter. It's similar to the one that was attached to the distribution list that went to many members of in the area.
Any question by board members?
I would just note the
Yes,
Assembly
yeah.
bill is not in here either. The 2 exhibits are not here for us to look at.
Okay. Duly noted. Any other questions, comments? Out to the public, any questions by members of the public?
Yvonne Stone, Fort Ord Environmental Justice. We're talking about Category 1, right? Well, what are we talking? Giving money to the Monterey Transit Authority. Okay, I'm standing here. What are we talking about?
We're talking about the MST Transit Bond funding, a letter sending in support.
Okay, that's right. That's what I'm talking about. I would just like to know why they're suspending service again in certain places when They have already suspended services in crucial places where residents who don't have transportation need to get to their appointments and jobs, and we are they're asking for funds, but are these funds to extend their services or to keep services in certain areas, or what are they requesting the funds for?
That's a good question. Our MST representative is not here right now. If the representative were here, they would probably be able to answer the question. I would ask you either contact them directly or defray the question until next meeting.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
It says in the board report here that it would enable MST to sell low-interest bonds to provide a funding pool for capital expenditures such as buses and replacing older or outdated and undersized transit facilities. Sounds like it's for capital.
Okay. Any other questions by members of the public? Okay, back to the board. Any other comments, questions, or can I have a motion, please?
Move approval, and I also have a request, if I get a second.
Okay.
I wonder if, I don't necessarily need to have a copy of the letter right now, but in order to have my packet be complete, maybe we could just get those sent, both the legislation itself and the letter sent electronically.
We'll make sure that happens. Good. Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Parker and a second by Mayor Rubio to authorize myself to execute a letter of support for Assembly Bill 730. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously again. Thank you very much. We now enter the workshop portion of our get-together today. First item for consideration is the Reassessment Report Category 1 Proposed Corrections, quote, second vote, unquote. We had some discussion the last time we got together with regard to the incompleteness or the perceived incompleteness of the packet with regard to Category 1. Staff was asked to come back with recommendations. From the packet you see here, what they're recommending, and just one possible course of action would be, it looks like I'll be forming an ad hoc committee, which even though it's ad hoc, will follow under the Brown Act with total visibility and so forth, to look at Category 4 options to try and save this board some time. It's taking longer and longer. The staff was recommending that not only does this ad hoc committee consider Category 4 options, but also consider Category 1 options. That is a possibility, and that's a staff recommendation. There are other options also. What we could do, as we discussed the last time, would be to provide all the information, each one of the board members here, so you can take a look at the Category 1 changes, redlined with the maps, and then look at it yourself and have your staff look at it, providing feedback directly to our staff. And it was to be expected the majority, say a large number of them would go through, everybody would agree on. There'd be a handful of ones that there were questions on that were not agreed upon with regard to the language or the way it was presented or whatever. The staff could then compile those controversial Category 1 statements, bring it to the board in a future meeting, say the next month, and then we could take a look at it as a board. So we have the option, at least in two options that I can see now, one having the ad hoc committee do a lot of the work and bring it back where it'd still be hashed out, or everybody gets the information, provides your feedback to the board provides it back to the staff provides it back to the board, and we could discuss it that way. Those are two options open for board discussion. Anybody have any ideas on this procedure?
Mr. Chair, certainly from my perspective, if the ad hoc, I think, can do a better job of vetting a lot of these issues. You have the public input so that when we get to this point, they've been vetted through the committee process. That's what the county uses also, and certainly even in the legislature, that's a good way to hash out and identify the common ground. We don't have to spend a lot of time here at the policy-making board level. So I would encourage that we either go that way, and I think it'll be a good way for the public also to get an opportunity to provide whatever input they want, and then you certainly can sift through that, vet those issues, and then just focus us on those ones that we really need to be able to come in to the meeting and vote on those.
So you would go with the ad hoc committee reviewing first? Okay. Any other comments from the board? Yes, Bill?
A variant on that might be, as I read it, there are three categories of things that were going on, and I think they got mixed into the same soup bowl and created a real problem for us. Some of them are truly typos, clerical errors, and are likely to generate virtually no controversy at all. Those might come to us as a board as a whole. There were things that might be described as clarifications, which are the planning versus development wording. And then we have things that are truly updates, and they carry significance. And they were being presented to us in particular in map changes that reflected, I think by intent, explicit policy decisions that had been made, but we don't know for sure. Those are the really tedious aspects of this that really do need review, and I think there's no question that for that category we need to go to the ad hoc committee. But we might treat at least kind of the section 1 and section 2, which are the clerical and the clarifications, directly to the board, have those kind of taken care of, because they are much less likely to generate serious controversy. And that was the option that certainly has come to my mind. The other thing that I realized eventually in reading this is a lot of the things that are the map changes or the changes of consequence, the updates, are actually considered category 2 in this process. So I don't know why we were getting them on the first round. So that's the other variation on this.
Thanks, Bill. Jonathan?
Members of the board, I'm sorry to interject here, but on page 18 of 56 in your packet, you'll see that there are 2 recommendations, Recommendation A and Recommendation B. I believe we are currently on Recommendation A in the board agenda. So what happened last Friday was there was a motion, but it was not a majority vote motion regarding direction to staff. And that motion is described under Recommendation A as direct staff to bring back before and after maps reflecting the reassessment report's Category 1 proposed corrections for further board consideration at the April board meeting. So it would require a 2/3 majority vote today for that motion to pass.
Okay, I'm sorry. Right, just a majority.
Simple
Okay,
majority.
Jonathan
Simple
is
majority.
correct. We're looking for a second vote. We've already had public input on the original motion. If there's any other, I'll allow staff comment. I'm sorry, board comment. Anybody have any comment with regard to a second vote on the original motion that was made at our last meeting? Yes, Bill.
So if all we're asking to do at this point is to update the maps, the before and after, and bring them back in April, are we ready to deal with them in April? Or should we just put this aside and look to the ad hoc committee and their timeline to be the timeline that we want to meet, which strikes me as a more productive use of everybody's time. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Right, since this is a second vote, the recommendation made by Member Camp would suggest that you would want to vote down this action and give different direction. We have to bring this back for second vote today. Those are sort of the rules. But if you're inclined to have the ad hoc committee do the work and that's the direction, you would want to not vote in favor of this. If you want us to bring back information in April in a more refined way, just with corrections and edits, we can do that in April if you vote yes on this motion, and we could move other things to the ad hoc committee if that's the recommendation of the board.
Yes, Ralph.
I think the motion as it stands is a good motion, but I think that in April, we can put together the ad hoc committee with the charge of taking those maps and doing something with them, instead of taking a step backwards and then starting the process all over again.
Do I hear a motion?
Well, I just want to make a comment,
Yes.
a quick comment.
Yep, okay, go
So
ahead.
what I'm understanding is that either you take this motion in its entirety, including the April deadlines, or you scrap this motion and we follow what Mayor Kemp is suggesting, which is we can make a new motion that would have the exact same intent, except we're deleting April as the deadline, which, because we're now looking at a different model, that may look like the better measure.
And I believe Mayor Kemp is looking at having the ad hoc committee do some of the work that would normally be done by the board. Is that correct?
I would hope that we don't all have to grovel through the maps to to figure out if they really reflect the current policy. I think we have to do the maps. That part of the motion makes sense to me. But the April deadline doesn't necessarily make sense to me. So that's why I'm raising the question. And I actually kind of like the nuance that Councilmember Morton has suggested, which is we incorporate it into the charter of the ad hoc committee in some way. Because we're saying here that if we go in that direction, and it's a little speculative, that's part of what they're going to do.
Okay, Ralph.
Yeah, the only problem with that scenario is that you're assuming a unanimous vote, and I don't think that's an assumption we can make.
Through the chair.
Yes, Ian.
Second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Would you restate the motion, please, just so we all understand where we're going?
The motion is the original motion.
The motion is the original motion. We have a motion and a second on the original motion. Any discussion on that right now? Yes, Tom?
I'd just like to suggest that this motion, as I read it, is the cake and you can eat it too. All it says is bring the maps back for consideration in April. Doesn't say what that consideration is, and it could be sending it to the ad hoc committee. If the ad hoc committee is created before April, I don't think I would see anyone objecting to them looking at the maps if they were created before April. So.
Okay, good. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Unanimous. We don't bring it back. Very good. Okay. It will come back in April. Okay, I guess now we start into the workshop. We have Mr. Scott Mccreary, Principal Facilitator. He was with us last time, did a great job. Scott, take it away.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Good to see you and all the board members again. We have a full agenda for this second workshop. The staff has put together a sequence that we think will help us get through this work. And basically what we're trying to do is to treat each of the categories as kind of a block, as a unit for presentation. We'll ask the staff to walk through that block of presentation, then take clarifying questions from the board. We'll take public comment before the final deliberations, and then as we wrap up the meeting, hopefully just before 5 o'clock, we'll ask for the board to provide direction on each item by category. So at this point, Darren is going to do a bit of a walkthrough on the approach, and Darren and Jonathan will do a tag team on the presentation.
This is Jonathan Garcia. I'll just start off with a few background remarks. Just that as a result of, so this whole process began back in June of 1997 when the FORA board adopted the base reuse plan and its program environmental impact report. And there was a suit filed by the Sierra Club on that action that the board took. That was settled with the FORA Sierra Club settlement agreement in 1998. And as part of that settlement, the FORA board adopted Chapter 8 into its FORA master resolution. And that there's a particular reference in that master resolution that requires the base reuse plan be reassessed. And so that reassessment process took place in the last calendar year, 2012, and the process was completed when the board adopted the reassessment report in December. And so the reassessment report lays out these 5 different categories, categories 1 through 5, and embedded in each of the categories are options for the board to consider. So what we have started with this workshop series is looking for the leadership of the board as far as where to take these options presented in the reassessment report. So with that just brief overview, I'll hand it over to Darren and we'll give this brief presentation.
Thank you. For today's agenda, we have reproduced up on the screen in just hopefully a simpler format to see all up on one page instead of spread across 2 pages. We have separated out the topics for today's discussion by category, categories 1, 2, 3, and 4, with category 5 of the reassessment report still being anticipated to be discussed at the next workshop, workshop number 3 of this series. For each of these categories, we have formatted today's discussion such as so as to have a brief recap or a framing of the issues, because recap in the sense of we have previously discussed categories 1 and 2, and as far as categories 3 and 4 later on today, staff will give an overview and framing of the issues, present staff's recommendation for each one of these categories of discussion from the reassessment report, and then seek initial board member questions, comments, or requests for clarification under each of these categories. And then at some point today, as we work our way through the agenda, take a break, and then take public comment on the topics for today's discussion, and then move into deliberation and direction stage from the board regarding each of these categories and staff's recommendation. So that's just a brief overview of the plan for today's flow of the discussion. Moving to category 1, Jen, if we could get that next PDF, please. We actually have, just in the last few minutes, have discussed category 1, but we're just going to have something up on the screen that's going to broaden out in just a moment to show these pages from the reassessment report that discussed the proposed category 1 corrections. This is on 2 pages of the reassessment report. And what you see up on the screen is a table that summarizes those corrections, and then the full text of the corrections was presented in the reassessment report, and that was that was the attachment to last week's agenda and board report for this category 1 item. In terms of staff's recommendation, our recommendation is to include the review of category 1 corrections in the proposed category 4 policy advisory committee, the scope of what that committee we'll be looking at, and that's an item a little bit further down the agenda for today. But as you know, we are proposing that the board appoint an advisory committee to delve into the issues laid out in category 4 of the reassessment report. And what we're suggesting is that it would be a good idea for the advisory committee to take a closer look and to address any outstanding issues that need to be resolved with category 1 as well. And that's basically just a recap of a discussion that we had just a few minutes ago before we formally kicked off the workshop, and it sounds like there is some board member interest in that approach. But at this point, in the interest of time, perhaps I could, if anybody wanted to add anything, turn it over to the board for any initial questions, comments, or clarification.
Right. So at this point, we want to pause and ask board members, do you have any clarifying questions about what Darren just presented with regard to category 1? Do not. And by the way, for those of you who were not here at the last meeting I facilitated, we have these cards that we ask you to tip up if you want to make a comment. That helps me keep track of the queue. And Supervisor Parker, I promise to get your name correct today. You're welcome. No doubt. All right. I don't see any questions, Darren.
Okay. Moving on to category 2 then. Category 2 is a set of actions that are considered to be more substantive in nature than the corrections that were identified in category 1, but still do not present any new policy direction or anything along if that order of significance, but are in general are reflections of actions that the board has already taken in previous decisions in previous years. And category 2 also includes an issue that was identified in the reassessment report that has to do with bringing the base reuse plan into a higher level of consistency with regional plans in the area, particularly the TAMC Regional Transportation Plan and the Air Pollution Control District's Air Quality Plan. This next section of the reassessment report, category 2, is summarized in attachment B to your board report today. It's page 25 of 56 in your packet today. And this next stage of the presentation is going to refer back to the first page of that attachment B, which is a summary table of each of the 4 subtasks, the primary subtopics within Category 2, if you will. The first one, which we're calling Category 2-1, in page 25 of your packet in that summary table, has to do with land use concept map modifications based on previously completed FORA board consistency determinations. This is something that we did discuss at the last workshop. However, we didn't have any visuals at that last workshop to help guide the discussion and convey a better sense of what this item has to do with. So hopefully these visual aids will provide some more context. This is the existing land use concept map and the base reuse plan. This is from the year 2001 when the base reuse plan was most recently republished, so it does not reflect actions that have been taken by the FORA board since that time. Predominantly the consistency determinations that have taken place since 2001. This land use concept map shows the mix of land uses that was anticipated to occur at that time when this map was created. The reassessment report identified, well, first what it did in the scoping report phase was summarize all of the consistency determinations that have been completed by the FORA board, and that was on, it's not part of your packet today, but those changes are summarized here on this page that you're seeing up on your screen, which is taken from Category 2 of the board report. The scoping report went through a detailed list of all the completed consistency determinations, and that was section 4-3 of the scoping report on page 4-170 of the scoping report. But this is from the reassessment report. It's from Category 2, and it's a summary of the changes that would take place on an updated or an up-to-date land use concept map. These are the changes on a parcel-by-parcel basis that would be reflected on a land use concept map update if that's something that the FORA board would like to have staff bring back to you. Shown on this figure, probably a little hard to see, but there are, well, and this laser pointer was supposed to be helping us, but there are areas of this map that have some cross-hatching on them. It's a little diagonal grid, and those are the areas within the former corridor that would be affected, or that would basically have their color on the map be changed in a land use concept map update in order to reflect the consistency determinations that were completed by the FORA board subsequent to the previous publication of the map. We did mention last time that a preliminary effort. We're going to try the laser pointer to see if we can get it. Okay, well, we did include a preliminary draft of an updated land use concept map in the reassessment report. This was figure 7.2 in the reassessment report, and it shows essentially what the changes would look like based on those previously completed consistency determinations. This map is very much a work in progress and a draft, and was presented that way in the reassessment report. There are additional steps that would need to be done in order to complete this effort. For example, this doesn't show all of the future roadways. It doesn't include the polygons that were shown on the original land use concept map that tie back to certain programs that are identified in the base reuse plan. So that's just a couple of examples of things that would still need to be added to this map in order to have it convey all the information that it needs to in order to be of the same information value as the original land use concept map. Also, we would want to vet this with the jurisdictions and do some quality control and make sure that this is an accurate reflection of the previous consistency determinations. So there's still additional work that would need to be done in order to have this map be ready to be presented to the FORA board for consideration and potential action. And staff is identifying a target date of May of this year to continue to work on this map and to bring it back for board consideration as a separate agenda item And again, that would be in May of this year. That's a summary of Category 2-1, and I'll move it over to Category 2-2 in your table, and I believe Jonathan is going to make some comments about that.
Okay, so the Category 2 also includes other FORA board actions besides consistency determinations. And so this map you see on the screen is a map describing the East Garrison Parker Flats land swap, which the board approved this agreement, and it essentially moved allowable development within the Parker Flats area and expanded it in the East Garrison area. And it was part of a negotiation, part of a settlement between MPC, the county, and I think BLM was involved in that process as well. But it was basically moving MPC's officer training public safety program from East Garrison over to Parker Flats. And it resulted in a net gain to habitat. Next slide, please. So this map here reflects the additional habitat added in the Parker Flats area. So it's the yellow parcels here, along with the Oak Oval Habitat Reserve. And then also additional habitat was identified within MPC's reserve here. So the MPC public safety program moved over to this parcel in Parker Flats, along with a firing range in this area south of that area. Next slide, please. And in the East Garrison area, the development area increased by approximately 200 acres, and then the habitat areas were identified as these yellow areas south of East Garrison. Next slide, please. So in table format, it just describes in total in East Garrison, the net loss of habitat was 210 acres. In Parker Flats, the net gain in habitat was 447 acres. So the overall net gain was 246.7 acres additional habitat was created as part of this land use swap. Next slide, please. Yeah. So another change that has occurred since the base use plan was adopted, and is not reflected in the current land use, in the base use plan land use map. This concerns the City of Monterey parcel. So imagine this is Highway 218, and General Jim Moore Boulevard is in this general direction. Now, in the City of Monterey area, the base use plan shows a land use of light industrial, I believe, within this dividing line, this middle line, south. And this northern line is a habitat parcel, or is described as habitat in the base use plan land use concept map. So since that was published in 1997 or 2001, the Army and FORA entered into a memorandum of agreement that identified the economic development conveyance parcels. And subsequent to that, FORA entered into implementation agreements with each of the 5 land use jurisdictions, including City of Monterey. And so the parcel boundaries for this particular parcel were adjusted north and eastward to include light industrial, which this area was previously identified as habitat. So that would be a potential adjustment for Category 2, along with any realignment of this east side, this Fort Ord Expressway, which runs basically north and south in the base use plan land use concept map, would potentially move easterly to the border of that parcel. But that would be laid out in any staff report that comes back at a future board meeting, depending on the direction received today. And then also, just to point out, this is the roadway reservation for the Highway 68 bypass. And so it would involve some coordination with City of Monterey, Delray Oaks, and others to identify these changes of roadway reservation, etc. So I'll turn back over to Darren to continue.
The next subcategory, if you will, and this is going back to the table on attachment B, we're calling category 2-3, modify circulation-related maps and text in the base reuse plan, and modify the CIP. There are two basic subtasks to this, or subcomponents to this. One of them has to do with realignment of the portion of the TAMC's multimodal corridor that goes through Fort Ord. And what you're seeing here on your screen is just a broad overview of the TAMC multimodal corridor, all of it, not just the Fort Ord portion, but the entire alignment going from Highway 1 to Salinas. And this is a close-up of what TAMC's current alignment plan is going through Fort Ord's main garrison. Highway 1 there on your left, of course. This is the 8th Street bridge over here where there would be its terminus and a station, and then the alignment goes out on Inter-Garrison Road. This is TAMC's current plan for the multimodal corridor, as we understand it. The way it's shown in the 1997, in the base reuse plan, at that time, the multimodal corridor was anticipated to have a different alignment and go out along parallel to Imjin Parkway. So there is a substantial change in the plan for most of that alignment as it goes through the former Fort Ord. Mentioned in the board report, the FORA board took action to adopt the current TAMC alignment, the current proposal, and the current plan for how that alignment would move through the base back in December of 2010. So this is an action that has previously been considered by the FORA board and was adopted at that time. And what we're discussing today is just going back and modifying, bringing up to date the figures in the base reuse plan to reflect that. So that's category 2-3A. The next one is category or subtask B. This is going back to that same figure we were looking at just a moment ago, and this has to do with deletion of references in the base reuse plan to a previously planned future curvilinear realignment of General Jim Moore Boulevard and 2nd Avenue, where they come close to intersecting with each other at Lightfighter Drive. So again, going back to the base reuse plan, actually we've got a close-up of this, so maybe we don't. So, well, I'll just try to handle it this way. We've got General Jim Moore Boulevard here and 2nd Avenue here, and essentially right here in this area at Lightfighter Drive, there was at that time planned to be a curvilinear section of roadway joining those two, so it wouldn't be necessary to turn, if you were heading northbound on General Jim Moore, you wouldn't be turning left on Lightfighter and then right on 2nd Avenue. It would just be one continuous roadway. However, there are numerous, I guess you could say, real-world issues associated with what was anticipated at that time. In order to have that curvilinear realignment be developed, it would involve such, well, some of the obstacles would include the fact that that new section of roadway would require demolition of a portion of the Presidio of Monterey Annex. I believe the gas station is directly in the path of that curvilinear new section, and there are other issues as well, including the expense and other logistical issues associated with what was anticipated to occur there. That is actually no longer in that curvilinear joining section is actually no longer in the FORA's capital improvement program, the CIP. We do have a close-up of that. The FORA CIP is showing is anticipating to continue to just maintain the existing conditions. wherein if you were headed north on General Jim Moore, you would turn left on Light Fighter and turn right on 2nd Avenue. So that existing condition is anticipated to remain in place for the foreseeable future under the CIP, and that what we are recommending is that the base reuse plan figures be modified to reflect that. And this is, as I said, this is reflecting existing conditions. General Jim Moore Boulevard received project level CEQA clearance for the project that has been developed and is in place at this time. So we don't believe there are any CEQA implications to this Category 2-3 B having to do with correcting the base reuse plan figures to reflect what's in the FORA CIP. Category 2-4 from the reassessment report. This is the final Category 2 action. The item has to do with base reuse plan modifications regarding consistency with regional and local plans. What this item essentially consists of is adding new policies and programs to the base reuse plan in order to bring the BRP into a better degree of conformance with the current versions of these regional plans that we discussed just a moment ago, the TAMC regional plan and the Air Pollution Control District's air quality plan. The reassessment report did identify all of the subject areas that would need to be addressed in these new policies and programs in order to achieve this result. And we have them up here on the screen, but they are also part of the attachment to your board report today. I'll just briefly summarize some of the subject areas here to make it a little more tangible and less abstract. The subject areas that would be addressed in these new policies and programs have to do with such things as this is basically just going right down the list of the first ones that are up on the screen here, but there's such things as prioritizing improvements to and maximize use of existing infrastructure, apply new technologies for roadway efficiency, consider use of roundabouts, implement road and highway capacity improvements, utilize intelligent transportation systems. The base reuse plan reassessment report process did identify, it included a review of what is in these regional plans and what would need to be addressed in the base reuse plan in order to have the BRP reflect these regional plans. But it does identify these in fairly general terms. So it's for example, what I just summarized is basically the subject area that each of these items has to do with, but this still needs to be the actual policy and program language in the base reuse plan would still need to be drafted and put into specific terms, essentially to match the format and the presentation of what you're seeing up on your screen here, which is simply a page from the base reuse plan to show how the policies and programs in the BRP are structured. So we would basically be taking that subject matter from the table that you just saw up on your screen, making it, carrying it across into terms to reflect this presentation in the policies and programs, and coordinating with our jurisdictional staff partners to make sure that the language that we draft is the correct language, because basically these new policies and programs would be creating, in most cases, new jurisdictional responsibilities just with the existing BRP policies and programs, which are mostly jurisdictional obligations to carry out, such as by saying that the city of Seaside or Marina or the county shall create new general plan policies to reflect these areas. Essentially, what we would be wanting to do as a next step is working with our jurisdictional staff partners to coordinate on the language of these new BRP policies and programs, and also coordinate that new policy and program language with the agencies themselves. So there are some steps that would still need to be done, although the reassessment report does lay out pretty clearly what the fundamental framework of these new policies and programs would be. So there's just some additional follow-up that would be required in order to basically operationalize these subject areas into concrete language and be able to bring it forward for board consideration. And we are identifying June of this year as a target date to be able to bring back the new policy and program language for your consideration, or at least a status report of where we are at that point. The final component of this Category 2 is letter B. It's the last item on your table in attachment B, which is recognizing that the general plan from the city of Monterey and the most recent general plan update from the county of Monterey have yet to be brought before the FORA board for a consistency determination review. So this item has to do with FORA staff continuing to coordinate with staff from those jurisdictions and to establish a timeline and a schedule for bringing those two general plans before you for a consistency determination. And that is the last item we have in Category 2, so I'm going to turn it over to the board at this point, or to Scott in the, as an in-between step for any initial comments or concerns or requests for clarification.
So thank you very much. Darren and Jonathan just walked through all of the pieces of Category 2, and they did so as a block, and we want to pause and ask specifically at this point, are there clarifying questions about any part of this presentation that you'd like to pose to the staff? And please put your card up if you do have a clarifying question.
I apparently don't have a card since I've changed locations.
Oh, you've
I will
moved.
be Tom Moore.
Dave, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I might. You know, it seems to me that this is perhaps the prime time to get these questions asked and answered that are being posed by the Sierra Club. There's this issue regarding, and I kind of couch this under the area of litigational avoidance. There's this concern about, in the governance code, 7 versus 7.1 and 8.5, I believe. There's a very actually accurate letter in here from Jane Haynes and company regarding a process that we've been using and perhaps lack of any, even a minimal form of CEQA analysis that should go on as we make these consistency determinations and change the use of some of these parcels. And I'd be interested in getting an outside counsel, as a CEQA specialist, to come in here and say, are we being legally consistent in what we're doing in regards to the settlement agreement from '98 with the Sierra Club? And it seems to me that's the pressing question. And to continue down this path without getting that issue resolved, I think we're just going to head into more trouble. So if that takes, you know, if that pushes the May date back a little bit, so be it. But otherwise, I think we're just asking for more confusion and more chaos in an area where we probably should have looked at this settlement agreement a while ago and said, okay, are we still following those rules? And now there's been a very dormant period here. We all know now we're back in an active, mildly or terribly combative mode. And I'd like to sit down and take a quick time out here and see where are we legally as far as consistency goes, and is there an additional step in CEQA review that we should be doing? And then if there was, then what are we going to do to address that issue before we go a whole lot further? That's my comment.
Thanks. So Dave, is your essential question to pose to an outside counsel, what are we missing any steps in CEQA review? Are there other steps we should take?
Consistent with the settlement agreement that we made with the Sierra Club, and specifically this argument between the government's title code between 7 versus 7.85, I think it is, which seems to have a significant difference in scrutiny.
Okay.
But that's my concern.
Thanks. Ralph.
Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Potter.
Oh, my Lord.
I'm sorry.
Oh, my goodness.
Hey, Jane, it finally happened.
It's contagious.
But the issue of the CEQA review is obviously a hot button issue, but I think there's also a little bit deeper need for that, and that is we can look at what actually constitutes notice. Are there any timelines that have passed that would require us to look at it differently? I think those are questions that haven't been asked or answered in regards to timing. What responsibilities are still valid after certain amounts of times have passed? So I think that would be a very good question to ask as well.
So Ralph, your question about notice and steps pertain also to CEQA, so you're asking about procedural requirements of CEQA and if they were met.
Procedural regarding CEQA, but also regarding the settlement agreement.
Regarding the settlement, okay.
The articles of that agreement.
Very good, thanks. Yes. Jane, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, that's good. First names are safer. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I want to understand Supervisor Potter's suggestion that we take a step back and look at whether we've really been complying with CEQA in all these cases. Would that essentially mean that we would not move forward on these Category 2 changes at this time?
Jane, my intent was that we get this issue resolved first.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I think we're just going to be initiating some sort of legal procedures, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd prefer to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Because my concern really is that the things that are being characterized as being minor are actually very significant land use changes that have controversy associated with them, questions as to the process that was followed, the legal implications, policy implications that I think just don't belong being done with staff. They're things that we actually have to wrestle with, and I think a great place to start is to really review the whole CEQA compliance issue.
And through the chair, I do this because of process and because of the legal ramifications. We may disagree on the changes of use, whether we think they're appropriate or not, but I think we all will agree that we want to be legally clear on how we're going about doing that. So I think we're on the same page.
Okay, well, let's take stock of where we are. So staff put forward a series of subcategories or sub-pieces of Category 2 and asked for direction. The suggestion now is, well, maybe we should push the pause button, do this more rigorous analysis, and do that first before these other steps that staff are asking for direction on. Is that essentially your suggestion, Dave?
Yeah,
it sounds like
very much the suggestion.
Jane
Rather than making changes and then
Okay.
being litigated because we made inappropriate changes, let's figure out whether we're legally appropriate and what's transpired in the past as we go forward, prospectively. I want a retrospective look and I want a prospective advice.
Okay. Gail, did you have your card up?
Well, I just went in this presentation, and thank you very much for the presentation, but that was one of the things, just having been educated on CEQA as being a newly elected member of the City Council in the City of Marina, it's every time that a board makes a change in a plan, it's triggers CEQA. And so even though these changes are characterized as we're not going to make that change in General Jim Moore, we're going to leave it as the status quo, the base reuse plan was an EIR based on that change. So if you take that change out, my understanding in my limited, this is not my area of law, but my initial question is, isn't that triggers CEQA? I've just been told that 7,000 times in every class that I've now attended to sit on this board. The other thing that I just want to point out, some of these changes, one in particular was, and I do understand that the FORA plan is to adopt the regional changes, and the TAMC multimodal corridor, I'm looking at the domino effect. So when you tell me this is a simple change, the domino effect of putting the multimodal corridor across the 8th Street Bridge, now I'm in a conflict with map 3.6-1 that has this recreation open space corridor going through there. So I don't think these are as easy as are being presented that we just need to go in, rush in, and just say, yep, this is easy, we just need to do this. So I appreciate and concur with the two supervisors that have spoken on CEQA.
Thanks, Gail. Ralph?
Yeah, just to follow up on what I agreed to, I think we do need to have the outside counsel. I do think we need to have the parameters defined for us in terms of timing and in CEQA and in regards to the settlement agreement. But I think that doesn't mean, we come to a screeching halt. I think that each of these maps needs to be studied by this board. Each of these conditions needs to be studied by this board. The history of each of those consistency determinations needs to be conversant at the board level so that we all understand when we get a decision what it is we're talking about. I don't think we just stop. I think we keep looking at this, keep studying it, keep understanding what each one of these changes was so that we're not rushing through it, but when we do get some kind of determination, we can, with the educated sense of where we are in this whole fabric, we can understand what to do next instead of restarting the engine again and trying to gain some momentum.
Okay. So we said we were looking for clarifying questions on Category 2, but in fact what we have here is, it sounds like, is a pivot and potential change in direction. Although what Ralph just said was a little bit of continuity of let's keep studying and reviewing. So Ralph, how would you see these two tracks stacking up and working together?
Okay, for example, the alignment of General Jim Moore or the Highway 68 extension, we know those things have changed. Okay, what was the process? Why were they changed? Were there negotiations that were involved in those changes? I'm sure there were. Each one of these negotiations that caused the change was for a cause and effect. Some of those realignments happened so that we could save habitat. So we need to know. We need to understand that. Why was the change made? I think that's really critical to the thought process for us. I mean, I can ask to clarify. That's a clarifying question. Why was the change made?
What was the thought process behind it? Right. I don't know if you can answer that at this point, Jonathan.
I think it requires additional staff review to get into each one of those specific instances.
Likely. Tom?
So I absolutely concur with Supervisor Potter and Supervisor Parker's every once in a while I get lucky suggestion. I do see sort of a hard legal nut here that I think would best be resolved outside the courtroom in an amicable way, if at all possible. From the perspective of Marina Coast Water District, of course, there is this plan out there, the 1997 plan, which we have on paper, plus this now question as to whether all these consistency determinations which made alleged changes to the plan are really part of the plan or not. Marina Coast Water District, of course, exists to support that plan. So number one, we really want to know, really, honest to God, what is the plan? And number two, if I were to ask you to raise your hands and say, how many of you are satisfied with our progress on the execution of the 1997 plan, I would take I'd probably put 10 or 20 bucks that I wouldn't see a lot of hands go up. Which says to me as a planner that one of the tasks we have to engage in the future is look at where are we now and where do we need to try and get to given all the changes that have occurred in the economy, in reality since 1997, and ask, okay, after we resolve this hard nut over what the current plan really is, where do we want to take that plan? And in line with Mayor Rubio's suggestion, that is a process that maybe would best be started now under the assumption that we're going to resolve these environmental issues and at least begin thinking about where do we want to go. And maybe where we want to go is right to whatever we think the 1997 plan is today, Or maybe it is some variant of that. I don't know, but I think that's a process that's likely to be not easy. And maybe we could at least get going on that process, because bringing it back to Marina Coast Water District, we get told frequently, you got to build this, you got to build that to give us water, you got to give us water. Well, we're putting real dollars in the ground and have done so, and we want to know where you want us to go.
Thanks, Tom. Let's go to Ian.
I think we have a plan. So I'm not interested in redoing the plan. We just spent several months and, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars to come up with this reuse plan we have right now. And I think Supervisor Potter's suggestion about let's get an independent look that represents this board to advise this board was an excellent suggestion. Because we don't need to continue to be on the defensive. So I heard it as being proactive as opposed to taking a pause. That's what we use, pause, but it's proactive. We're moving forward by saying we need someone to tell us maybe we need to relook at some CEQA issues. And I'm okay with that, and their independent view, well, then that's the board will have to take that, and if we need to go look at something, go look at it back. But to try to turn that opportunity for us to get an independent view into another way of re-looking at the plan, then I would just say you need to be a little careful and cautious, because throughout these last many years, this board has allowed more land to be protected. And if we want to go redo some of these things that we did for pro-development, then maybe some of that conservational land that we gave away may need to come back because of this economy, and we need more land to develop. So that's in there too. So when we tell you let's go back and look at it, don't think we just gave all the conservation land and we locked that up and then we're just going to continue to get more. Because I know my community, when you look at that map, quite a bit of that land for that monument was in the section that was given to Seaside. So if we want to go relook at the view, the vision statement, then maybe somehow this board put too much of that in Seaside and we need more developable land. So how far do you guys want to go back in the decisions we made? Because I was here when we voted for the National Monument. I was proud to vote for it, and I'll vote for it again. But how far do we want to go back to make changes? So I'm happy with the independent view, and I think all the comments that everybody added, you know, I'm on board with that, because we need someone to represent us to say the Sierra Club is right. Let's relook at this, because I don't have the expertise, well, and none of you guys had the expertise, because you're representing other entities. So I support the independent view.
Okay, thanks very much. So Ian brings up a couple of different points here. One is the support for the independent counsel. Another strong statement, hey, we have a plan. And also a reminder, look at the decisions and trade-offs that have been made recently. And if you take a fresh look or go back too far, maybe you give some of those away or open those up. Back to Ralph.
Yeah, when we talk about looking at those decisions, we need to understand why they were made. But I don't think we need to go back and undo those decisions. The city of Seaside goes through a strategic plan session every 6 months. So we know what we want to do. We've looked at it consistently. We've measured it. We've checked it for relevance. We've done that every 6 months. So we're not interested in trying to figure out what to do, because we already know what we want to do. We already have our plans. And as far as Marina Coast Water, we just hope that you can keep up with the need and the demand we have for the water that you're obligated to provide us in the Fort Ord footprint. So as far as the other communities, those are their decisions. We're still sovereign in our own localities, and we can make those decisions for ourselves. But for an agency that covers the entire Fort Ord footprint in terms of service, that's an important issue for you. So you can put the checkbox just put a check in that box next to Seaside. Yes, we need the water. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Well said. Bill.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the sentiments for legal review of our CEQA obligations. I'm, frankly, very relieved. I came away from our last meeting, which wasn't all that long ago. I think it was last Friday, feeling very agitated and frankly frustrated. And this feels like somebody running and their body's a little bit ahead of where their feet are, and you just know you're not headed in a good place when that happens. The other thing procedurally that I think we've got to think about is how do we interact with each other. I'm counting 24 people around this table. This is a very, very difficult format for any decision making. The lists of items to be determined are extraordinarily long. There is, in my mind, no prospect that sitting in this arrangement as our primary working group that we can deal with what we have to deal with. And I would really encourage, and I don't know where to look for this, but I would really encourage that we think about broader use of subcommittees or workshops where we break up into smaller groups, each of us focusing on some part of this thing to work our way through it. And without that, I think we're going to have some serious dilemmas about making the progress we'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of strong points from Bill. One, yet another endorsement for outside legal review of CEQA obligations. And then you restated, actually, a point that you made at the first workshop, asking questions about, is this the best format to get all this work done? And in fact, I think we may have some ideas from our chair about some other formats that can move the work forward. So thanks very much for that, Bill. Yes, go ahead, Dave.
And I agree with Bill. I think that we are at a critical juncture here, but before this went to any subcommittee, while we get this legal analysis, I really think that should be brought back to the board in its entirety. There's really nothing much to discuss once we get an opinion back, and I think the body as a whole is better served to deliberate as a whole than to refer a level of comfort with legal interpretation to a subcommittee. And you are right, the recommendation further down in the agenda is that there be a subcommittee appointed to address these other ongoing issues. But I think right at the moment we're kind of at a look-see opportunity. And in Jane's letter, she consistently says that there may be very minor levels of CEQA review that need to be done, a neg deck, a mitigated neg deck, any of those, but that it's simply a matter of skipping that process that breaks the law. And that's something I don't think we want to do. Breaks the law, breaks the agreement, whatever. And so if we can just get clarity on that, I think that's a huge step forward. That's my whole point.
Good. So from Dave.
And probably at some point we ought to hear from Gene.
Right. The work team idea might have merit, but by all means take any legal analysis that is commissioned back, bring it back to the full board so the board can consider and deliberate on that. Bill. It's all right. Any other? Yes. Sure. Let's use the microphone. Yes.
So anyway, I think, there's some excellent law firms. There's McCutcheon Doyle in Sacramento. They're associated with developers generally, if that's your taste. There's Shute Mahali in San Francisco. They're hired a lot by governments and so on and so forth. So I really hope you get a first-rate land use law firm for, but not just CEQA.
Good, thank you. So we have some complex advice emerging, though this was not yet quite the moment when we were looking for final direction on this item. We have moved on to 3:30. We started at 2. I'm wondering if we want to pivot to Category 4 and then take a break, have public comment, and come back and see how we're doing relative to Category 3. Mr. Chair, what do you think of that?
Reasonable plan, let's do it.
All right. We are going to leapfrog to Category 4. Yes.
Well, Category 4 of the Reassessment Report is where there was the most interest, I think it's fair to say. This is where this part of the Reassessment Report has to do with consideration of really new policy direction, the potential board actions that could create new policies, new programs, and involve really substantive changes to the base reuse plan and the concepts that were laid out in the base reuse plan. This is an attachment. Okay, so there's an attachment to your board report that summarizes all of the topics and options in all of the categories. It's attachment A, but sorry, that's page 22 and 23 of your 22 through 24 of your packet today. And we do have a slide here at the end of our presentation that just takes all of those, pulls out the Category 4 topics and options and just puts them up on one slide. The topic 4 topics and options are grouped into several basic subcategories, if you will. We have land use, economic development and jobs, urban blight and cleanup, aesthetics, housing, transportation, water, and the Fort Ord National Monument, cultural resources, and veterans cemetery. Those are the basic groupings of options that the reassessment report identified and discussed. This is all based on public input, primarily a detailed review of the base reuse plan, but primarily the input that was gathered from public workshops and a long public process throughout April to the end of 2012. There are 39 individual subtopics here, although there are probably things that the FORA board could do or consider doing that would address more than one of them at the same time. Staff in the board report identified a few possible considerations that people may want to consider, or strategies to consider for developing priorities for what could be looked at by FORA staff as a work plan for the near term and medium term. We're thinking it would be extremely helpful for us to be able to have a plan of what we'd be working on and what would be manageable for the remainder of this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. Some of the considerations that we suggested as staff in the board report were to give particular weight to action items that were previously highlighted during the reassessment processes as yet to be completed obligations under the BRP, and or receive the greatest amount of public input during the reassessment process, and or positively leverage recent changes such as the exploration of opportunities related to the National Monument designation in 2012, or would be the most cost-effective to implement because of having a relatively short timeline and or less need to obtain outside expertise. But these are just some options that we were suggesting as staff that may be worthwhile to consider in developing or helping to develop a work plan for staff for this near and medium term time frame that we're looking at. We recognize that there's a great deal of subject matter here in this category, and there's been a lot of public interest and scrutiny of these issues that have come up. And that's why we, for various reasons, are recommending that it would be potentially very useful and helpful to the process for the board to consider appointing an advisory committee to explore these issues, explore some of the logistics related to them, meet several times in a working group kind of format over the next 1 to 2 months or so as a working group or working team to develop some initial priorities, recommendations. These would be recommendations for the board to consider at Workshop 3 and or at a subsequent board meeting. Again, just to reiterate that these we would not be recommending or suggesting that the advisory committee determine what those priorities are, but to develop recommendations for the board's, the full board's consideration at a subsequent meeting. Related to this, at staff's request, our facilitation consultant, Concur Inc., Mr. Mccreary, has submitted a supplemental scope of work to participate in and to facilitate the advisory committee's work process over the next couple of months. This was attached to your board report as the final attachment, Attachment G. This is a supplemental scope of work and budget to cover these meetings that were not, of course, obviously included in the original contract with Concur Inc., because this is a new recommendation regarding the creation of this advisory committee. In previous drafts of this agenda, the scope and the associated budget had not yet been determined, but we do have this as an attachment to your report today, and the proposed contract amount is $9,100 of new budget authority that would be needed in order to work with Concur Inc. As a facilitation consultant for the advisory committee. Scott, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about the advisory committee?
Well, I think two important points. One, this advisory committee is intended as a subset of the FORA board. So all of the members of this advisory committee would be FORA board members. Number two, a point that you made, Darren, the concept is this subcommittee would be essentially a work team to go into greater depth than is easy or probably appropriate in a plenary setting like this. I mean, Bill, as you said, wordsmithing lengthy, complex planning documents in a room full of public officials is not a great use of everyone's time, and it's quite difficult to do. And in fact, in our original proposal, we suggested that this kind of a work team might be a good idea. So I think that's important. The other point is, obviously, I believe our chair has some concepts about how such a subcommittee would be constituted, and I would turn to Jerry and ask for him to fold in here.
Yeah, but just a comment. First of all, just establish the obvious that the board of directors here makes all the decisions. This is the power. The voting members of the board of directors make those decisions. The executive committee provides recommendations, ad hoc committees provides recommendations, and special committees provide recommendations. That's all they do. They try to simplify the process, hash out the differences, come up with logical, persuasive arguments for the board, and the board decides on it. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. What we're trying to do is sometimes with the large numbers that Bill said earlier, it's kind of hard with 25 folks with differing opinions to really move the train forward by picking up all the minutiae. It's like watching sausage being made sometimes. So what I was thinking was if I'd like to appoint an ad hoc committee to take a look at the Category 4 recommendations and those areas that were mentioned earlier by Bill with the Category 1 to hash it out. I wanted a diverse ad hoc committee that would follow the Brown Act, even though theoretically ad hoc's not. We would follow the Brown Act. We would go ahead and we would notice our meetings and go through all the minutiae. But having a diverse group representing all sides of the spectrum, at least that I've seen here thus far, be able to work out and hash out and maybe achieve consensus and maybe not achieve consensus. If we don't achieve consensus, we bring both ideas rationally thought out, logically thought out with all the hours we'd put, well, hopefully not that many hours, but with the time we would put before it, back to the board here, make things a little simpler for the rest of the board members to do it. So in that vein, and in thinking about it long and hard and looking at the diverse opinions that we have here, The ad hoc committee would consist of myself. I would be the chair. I'd ask Vice Mayor Ian Oglesby if he would join the ad hoc committee, Councilman Tom Moore, Supervisor Jane Parker, Councilwoman Gail Morton, President Eduardo Ochoa, and Councilwoman Victoria Beach. And that would be, if you look at the names there, I think we've got a real wide range of opinions, backgrounds, interests, and so forth. And I think with those people in the same room, the door locked, starting each meeting, holding hands and saying kumbaya, we might be able to get something done in that regard. But those are my thoughts right there.
Yeah, furthermore, I believe the thought was the staff would be very actively involved in supporting these deliberations, would be bringing work products, working alongside with you. And we had suggested perhaps 3 meetings. I mean, there's not infinite time. You're all busy. We'd suggested 3 meetings of 2 to 3 hours each. They might all be in person. Maybe one would be on the phone. So some kind of bounded but focused level of effort is what we had suggested.
That's correct.
So let's at this point pause and see if there are any questions on the Category 4 presentation, which really is an approach to move forward and sort and deal with this long list of 39 rather than a list of 39 recommendations for action or changes. Any clarifying questions? I see none. Okay. Ian.
As it relates to the ad hoc committee, or is just
Category 4 presentation that staff gave and the ad hoc subcommittee, both.
I would just
Either one.
I would just ask the chair, do I still have to sit between these two?
Oh, come on.
It's called the rose between the it's called a thorn between the roses. I'm sorry.
Michael, did you want to add anything?
No, it's up to the chair to appoint the ad hoc committee. It's not a board action, so I have appointed the ad hoc committee. And as long as the individuals I've appointed would accept the charge, we'll move forward.
Thank you. Ralph, clarifying question?
Yes. Now the committee would look over all these different categories, or
it'd be category through the facilitator. It would be category 4, and then category 1.
Right.
Okay. Well, my concern is
so far. I mean, you can give them more homework, but that's
well,
a lot already.
no. What I'm trying to do is lighten the load. Would it be appropriate to have maybe two committees, because there's a lot of stuff here? Kind of parse that work up, just in the interest of moving it forward on a parallel track.
Are you suggesting splitting Category 4, or one for Category 1 and one for Category 4?
Whatever, either way would at least keep the track moving. Just a thought.
No, I appreciate it, Ralph, and we love being in each other's companies. And 4.5-hour meetings on Fridays are the most enjoyable thing I do all week long. But I was hoping that we get the committee together first, and especially Category 1. I mean, there's going to be some discussion, but if the staff does their job, and 90% of the work's going to be done by the staff, providing all the information that we expect to want to the committee, the committee hopefully should be able to go through there, zero in on those areas that are contentious or we need discussion and move forward. Then looking at the Category 4 also, if it looks like we have a monster on our hands and we're not getting anywhere over a long period of time, we can reconsider, and I can bring it back before the board for more information and discussion.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that seems wise, and I would certainly agree that ideally with more focused staff work, they can bring forward options for fairly quick deliberation by the subcommittee. At least that would be the hope. Michael.
Yeah, as Chair indicated, he suggested that this was an ad hoc committee and he would be appointing it. I think it would be a publicly held meeting, so it's not a closed door kind of session, but I would anticipate that we could use as part of that process, because these are policies that the interest groups have a great concern, as do the jurisdictions, that they would also actively participate. Or so that we would have public input to that process as well, but it would be a sort of a committee deliberation process.
That's right. Yeah, so we could adopt a format not unlike what we have here with deliberation focused on the board and then public comment. But I think, as you said, Jerry, these details are to be pinpointed as this group comes together. So, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking at this point maybe we take a break, come back, go into Category 3, then take public comment.
How
That
long a
sound
break?
reasonable? 10 minutes?
10 minutes, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay, take a break for 10 minutes, please. Michael?